Okay, we'll start with this. Reigning WBO bantamweight champion Dina Thorslund posted this via her Instagram stories, and she is once again expressing an interest in facing her countrywoman,
fellow Dane,
Sarah Mahfoud. Sarah Mahfoud, who was in action not but a few days ago in defense of the blue belt, in defense of the IBF featherweight title. Featherweight, that's 126 pounds, whereas Dina currently campaigns at 118 pounds. They're two divisions removed from each other. Used to be one.
Dina used to campaign at 122 pounds.
She won the WBO title there. Had a few fights and subsequently moved down to the bantamweight division. That's 118 pounds.
They're two divisions removed from each other.
This isn't the first time that Dina Thorslund has expressed an interest in moving up in weight to take on her countrywoman, Sarah Mahfoud. We saw this same sentiment expressed last year. Talked about it here on the channel.
Does the fight happen?
Dina Thorslund is the one expressing an interest in this fight. Dina Thorslund, who is the naturally smaller fighter.
I've never seen Sarah reciprocate that interest.
I'm not even saying that she has or hasn't. I'm saying if she has, I've never seen it.
Sarah's naturally bigger than Dina.
4 years older, though not as experienced as a fighter, not as experienced as a champion. Dina Thorslund, despite of being naturally smaller,
she is
a bit younger, she's a two-division champion. Far more active the last few years than Sarah Mahfoud. Sarah's only fought 2 times in the last 3 years or so. She had that Carbajal fight in February of 2020. She sat out the rest of the year, sat out all of last year.
Didn't fight at all in 2021.
She was in action last week in defense of the blue belt, in defense of the IBF title. There are some lengthy gaps between these fights.
Whereas Dina's been more active.
Dina Thorslund has been comparatively more active, having fought 4 times in the last 3 years. Once in the year of 2020, 2 times last year, 2 times in 2021.
Again, just a few weeks ago.
Dina Thorslund has more professional bouts, more pro experience than Sarah Mahfoud. She's a more active fighter and a more decorated champion. She is a 2-division champion.
They're both unbeaten champions.
Both Dina and Sarah, but Dina's quality of competition is a cut above Sarah's, and she is more experienced as a fighter, more experienced as a champion.
Do you think the fight happens?
Well, they're both on the same schedule, more or less. They were both in action this month, though I've never heard any preliminary conversations or any preliminary talks to do that fight over in Denmark, and if I'm being honest, Dina Thorslund is in a much more vibrant division than Sarah Mahfoud. Dina Thorslund campaigns in the bantamweight division, where Ebony Bridges just won the IBF title. Jamie Mitchell reigns as that division's WBA champion. Yulihan Luna of Mexico, she's also there.
There's a lot more going on at bantamweight than featherweight.
Matchroom has 2 or 3 ponies in that bantamweight show.
Ebony Bridges, Shannon Courtenay.
Whilst Jamie Mitchell's not an according to Hoyle Matchroom fighter, her last title defense with Carly Thumper Skelly, that was part of a Matchroom show.
Lately, I haven't heard anything about that rematch with Shannon Courtenay.
I mean, let's see if it happens, but the rematch doesn't seem to have the fight date, doesn't seem to be confirmed. Those are just the facts, at least right now they are. The way I see it, Dina's already in
There's a lot more going on at bantamweight than featherweight.
Right now there is, and you'll excuse me for saying so, because a major promotional outfit has several fighters in the bantamweight division, that yields more opportunities for a fighter and a champion like Dina Thorslund to box on a major platform. Potentially, I feel there's more money to be made at 118 pounds than 126.
No, I don't know that Thorslund versus Mahfoud gets made.
It certainly would be the most intriguing fight the featherweight division has had to offer in a very long time, but that's a testament to what I'm talking about. The featherweight division doesn't have as much news coming out of it. It doesn't have the profile that the bantamweight division has.
The biggest name at featherweight is up there at lightweight.
Unified featherweight champion Amanda Serrano, who's going to be taking on Katie Taylor at 135 pounds.
It's next Saturday.
Not as much news coming out of the featherweight division as what you see in the bantamweight division. Not as much opportunity, not as many fighters, not as much money to be made. Personally, I think Dina Thorslund should stay put. Stay at 118 pounds.
Moving up to featherweight for Sarah won't make as much news as unifying with one of the bantamweight champions.
It's a major promotional outfit with several fighters campaigning in the bantamweight division that box on a major platform. And if Dina plays her cards right, she could be one of them. I think she should stay at 118 pounds.
At least for now, that division is buzzing.
Spend a little bit more time there, and if the well dries up, then you revisit that Sarah Mahfoud fight, provided she's still champion.
I don't know what the odds of that Mahfoud fight happening are anyway.
In men's heavyweight news, per tweet from Michael Benson, Tyson Fury on who should fight for the WBC title if he vacates I'd like to see Deontay Wilder fight whoever for it. He just doesn't get the credit he deserves. And I do believe he's still the second best in the world. I believe he knocks everybody else out.
Tyson Fury's still giving that guy his flowers.
Even if there was an argument for Wilder to be the number 2 heavyweight in the world, I think those 2 back-to-back shellackings at the hands of Tyson Fury.
Whatever he was, he might not be that anymore.
We haven't heard a heck of a lot when it comes to Deontay Wilder. The last we heard, he's supposed to be taking some kind of psychedelic, psychotropic tea to help him decide whether or not he wants to retire. That was
weeks ago.
The fight with Tyson Fury, the last one, that was 6 months ago.
That's right, it's been 6 months since they last fought.
And for some reason, the WBC still has Deontay Wilder ranked as their number 1 contender, having not fought in 6 months, having no fights planned, coming off of 2 back-to-back losses to the same guy.
2 fights in 2 years, and both of them are knockout losses.
Even if they were knockout losses to Tyson Fury, a man who many people would say is this era's premier heavyweight, that's besides the point. How could Deontay Wilder lose 2 back-to-back fights over the course of 2 years? They're the only 2 fights he's had in the last 2 years, and he doesn't lose any ground in the WBC's ranked standings.
You know what's going on there.
Behind Deontay Wilder is Smoking Joe Joyce and Joe Parker.
At number 2 and number 3.
If Tyson Fury retires and Deontay Wilder follows him off into the sunset, if neither one of these 2 guys ever box again, these are the 2 guys that are most in line to fight for the WBC title. And it just so happens they officially announced their upcoming summer blockbuster bout yesterday.
If Fury's going to retire, Frank is going to need a new heavyweight.
New prize stallion, a new heavyweight champion. And who better than Smoking Joe Joyce? So you know what? He ain't no spring chicken. If he's going to box for a world title, if he plans on becoming a world champion, time is of the essence because he ain't getting any younger.
Might not seem like it, but that guy's 36 years old.
Many people still don't believe that Tyson Fury is going to call it a career, and we won't know for sure until he officially vacates the WBC title.
I'm sure the WBC are going to give him plenty of time to make a decision.
And as soon as he does, we'll know for sure. For the time being, the WBC still ranks Deontay Wilder as their number 1 contender, coming off of 2 back-to-back losses over the course of 2 years. No fights planned, no fights scheduled, not at this time.
No tentative fight date.
Last heavyweight news we heard by way of PBC's Isolation Island, Andy Ruiz has been pulled out of a fight he was supposed to have with Tyrone Spong to honor an engagement with Luis Ortiz.
So if Andy's fighting Luis in his next fight, he ain't fighting Wilder.
A few weeks ago, I recall hearing some preliminary news that Robert Helenius may be facing Hughie Fury on the Sky Sports boxer side of things. And if Robert Helenius ends up fighting Hughie Fury, he ain't fighting Deontay Wilder.
There goes another potential opponent option.
I hardly expect Deontay to make his big ring return against the likes of a Frankie Sanchez, who dished out Efe Ajagba his first professional loss. That'd be a very dangerous fight for Deontay Wilder coming off of 2 consecutive losses. Those things in mind, and that being said, if Andy Ruiz is unavailable, and Robert Helenius is unavailable, and Frankie Sanchez is a bit too much for now, what else does the PBC have to offer Deontay Wilder?
What about Adam Kovnowski?
He's coming off of 2 back-to-back losses. So's Deontay Wilder. He's a PBC fighter.
Yeah, but didn't Adam say he's in talks to fight Derek Chisora?
Well, that's the story by way of a Polish news outlet that he spoke to, but those plans, they can always change. The real question is, does Deontay Wilder even want to come back to boxing?
This is his best bet to become a champion again.
This is his best chance to become a 2-time heavyweight champion. All the news we've heard, all the plans, they can change. They can end up changing. This is boxing we're talking about in boxing news. Plans change all the time. All of that can be affected if Deontay Wilder actually decides to come back. The WBC have left the door open for him to see himself become a 2-time heavyweight champion. They're certainly helping him out. How could he still be ranked at number 1 after 2 back-to-back losses over the course of 2 years?
Unethical as it might seem, that's the situation.
Deontay Wilder's ring return could be just what the doctor ordered for the PBC, because there are the other guys they've been grooming and building and trying to turn into pay-per-view stars. Those guys, they're in a bad way. I mean, Gervonta Davis is supposed to be on the verge of leaving Mayweather Promotions, and even if he doesn't, he didn't put up big numbers for them anyway. He's never cracked 300,000 buys the way that Deontay Wilder did. You think about Errol Spence Jr., and his numbers are down. From the time he debuted on pay-per-view with Mikey Garcia till now,
He hasn't cracked 300,000 pay-per-view buys ever since.
to date, Deontay Wilder is their top-selling guy. I mean, that's the way it breaks down. It's relatively speaking. That's not saying he's a global star. That's saying that as far as PBC fighters go, he's brought them in their biggest numbers.
If he were to come back, it could be commercially successful.
The real question is, does he want to? He may still be a broken man. He may be a shell of his former self, having suffered 2 back-to-back shellackings at the hands of the same guy. You have to consider that. And you also have to consider that in spite of how commercially successful Wilder's return could be, should it be, for the WBC title, all of this is contingent on Tyson Fury making good on his word, that he really is walking away from the sport of boxing, that he really will vacate the WBC title, thereby making it available for Wilder to fight for. All of this is contingent upon that.
Just a few things to think about.
Should Tyson Fury retire, the door is open for Deontay Wilder to make his big ring return, and WBC themselves have left that door open to where he could possibly box for the green belt once again. If he decides not to, if he goes away and stays away, so does Fury. The next 2 guys you might see boxing for the green belt are Joyce and Joseph Parker. It all depends on whether or not Tyson Fury actually means business and he's calling it a career. We'll see. As stated in our previous segment, it appears that the rumors, they check out. Joseph Parker will be boxing Smokin' Joe Joyce sometime this summer on BT Sport. He's officially done with Matchroom, and he's crossed over to the Frank Warren Old Fisheye side of things. I said it before, and I'll say it again.
Joseph Parker can make up for not fighting Philippe Hrgovic
by fighting Joe Joyce. I don't know what they might have offered him on the BT Sports side of things that was so much better than what he was offered to fight Philippe Hrgovic. The situation is about the same.
The threat level is about the same.
2 big guys, strong guys, Olympic amateur standouts, unbeaten fighters as professionals vying to become world champions. By way of the IBF, Philippe Hrgovic is in a pole position to become
their mandatory challenger.
The same applies to Joe Joyce by way of the WBO and the WBC. Joe Joyce and Joseph Parker are the number 1 and number 2 guys by way of the WBO. By way of the WBC, they're the number 2 and number 3 guys. The only guy ranked ahead of them is Deontay Wilder, who we just talked about, and we don't know if he's going to actually come back. If he doesn't, that makes Joseph Parker and Joe Joyce the number 1 and number 2 guys.
I recall David Higgins making some mention of money.
They didn't like the money for the Philippe Hrgovic fight. That was the gist of it. Did Frank Warren, Old Fish Eyes, offer Joe Boxer Parker more money to box Joe Joyce than what was offered to him to fight Philippe Hrgovic? Could that be what influenced his decision?
Did he offer him more money? Did he offer him a deal with incentives?
Incentives that extend beyond the Joe Joyce fight, beyond that singular contest, that singular match. Something influenced Joe Boxer Parker to take on Joe Joyce as opposed to Philippe Hrgovic, and it must have been something substantial because the threat level is about the same.
Yeah, one of those fights is just as good as the other.
Difference between them? Joe Joyce, whilst not being a household name, not yet, not in the United Kingdom, he still seems like a more well-known guy than Philippe Hrgovic, at least in the UK boxing scene. And right now, UK's got boxing, UK's got heavyweight, so maybe that was the determining factor.
That money.
Joseph Parker is an established name in the UK boxing scene. He might be a New Zealand national, but he's fought some of the biggest names in heavyweight boxing that just so happen to be guys from the UK. He's fought many of them. He's fought Anthony Joshua. He's fought Dillian Whyte. He's coming off of 2 fights with Derek Chisora. Perhaps Joseph and David Higgins have a preference. If they're going to take on a risky fight, an unbeaten guy, they'd prefer it be a UK guy, marketed to a UK audience, i.e., more money.
It's a great fight.
Similar dynamic to Parker versus Hrgovic. Parker versus Joyce features a more experienced fighter, vastly more experienced, having faced better competition than Joe Joyce has so far. Joseph Parker is a former champion.
He also happens to be younger than Joe Joyce by a few years.
Joseph Parker's 30, Joe Joyce is 36. Joe Parker, he's 6 years younger than Joe Joyce. You wonder if they're going to build this as a pay-per-view. Perhaps they will in the United Kingdom. I'm not so sure they try for that in the United States.
Stateside, we'll probably see it on ESPN+.
If it doesn't end up on ESPN+, we'll probably be able to watch it on Fight TV at a reduced pay-per-view price than what an American pay-per-view goes for. I don't know, maybe $20, $30 as opposed to $80.
Could happen that way.
Does Joseph Parker really have the killer instincts now that people say he hasn't had the last couple of years, now that he's with Andy Lee, and he's coming off a great performance with Derek Chisora in their rematch. He exhibited the gusto, at least more of it, in the second fight than he did in the first. I think a lot of people will agree. Derek Chisora did enough to win that first fight, whereas the second one was clearly...
Don't forget, he needed 2 fights to get 1 decisive win over Derek.
He needed 2 fights to put a stamp on it, though at the same time, Joyce, in spite of beating his domestic rival and stablemate Daniel Dubois, stopping him, forcing him to submit, before that, he didn't look great against Brian Jennings, and after that, after the Dubois fight, he didn't look great against Carlos Takam.
Yeah, but Joseph Parker didn't look great against Carlos Takam.
Be that as it may, he fought a younger Carlos Takam than the version of him Joyce faced. Neither guy looked all that great against Carlos Takam.
It's often said Joyce has a cast iron chin.
He's a big guy with a great engine, not the snappiest puncher, doesn't seem to have much speed in those hands, so those punches, they do find a home, don't they? These are the elements that make this a very interesting fight. Joseph Parker really is a lot more experienced as a professional than Joyce. He's younger than him by 6 years.
But does he have the killer instincts to win this fight?
When after having hurt Derek Chisora, instead of finishing him off, he allowed him to walk into a corner, perch himself there, waiting to set up counter shots.
Instead of taking him out.
Does he really have, here today, the killer instincts to dish out Joyce's first professional loss? It's a risky fight.
It's risky for Joyce, too. This is a step up in class.
It's a step up from Daniel Dubois, Brian Jennings, Carlos Takam. Those guys have never been world champions. Joseph Parker has.
He's known for having a decent chin, too.
Bottom line, I like the fight.